Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz guitarist David Singley. He has Midwestern roots and is now promoting his newest 2017 album, Good Hope, and it's a long time in the making. Over the years, he has shared the stage with jazz brass like Bob Brookmeyer, George Shearing, James Moody, Bob Mintzer, Phil Woods, and the great Buddy DeFranco. He has spent quality time in the orchestra pit of many touring Broadway musicals. He's been on NPR's A Prairie Home Companion with Garrison Keillor, and these days he is a lecturer of music at the Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, teaching jazz guitar and improvisation. He's got a great jazz bio that you need to hear from him. So please dig this interview, my friends.
All right, David, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Sure, you bet.
So the topic of discussion here at the top of this interview is your new album, Good Hope. Talk to me about this album and how you feel about it.
Well, it represents a couple of different things. First, it's kind of in two parts. Half of the tracks were recorded in 2002 as part of a project that I was involved with, and for various reasons, life getting in the way, that particular band, we just never did anything with it, but I felt that some of those tracks were really strong. And then the rest of it was recorded in 2014 and 2015. And so I just kind of put those two together, talked to those guys and bought them out of their sort of share of that project and put them together. So it represents, this is the first record that I've made in 20 years. That's sort of the first thing I should say. So it represents me just kind of trying to clean house a little bit and put out some things that I've written or recorded in the last, 15 years or so, and also kind of also include some things a little more up to date of what I've been doing recently.
Why was there such a long break?
Well, again, just kind of life gets in the way and happens, and I was going to move to New York City in 2001, and then suddenly in September of 2001, moving to New York City didn't seem like such a good thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing led to another, and a few years later I found myself divorced and kind of starting over again. And so that's in a nutshell, just kind of life happens. I certainly, played music my entire life, so I was still making music, but, the energy and time and money and everything that it takes to put a record together was just not something that was on my radar. Also, that having been said, this project took several years. It was probably about 2013 when I really decided, okay, I'm going to do this. So it took a few years, even once I made the decision to, okay, I'm going to collect a bunch of stuff. I'm going to put a record out. It took several years for that to finally actually happen.
So let me ask you this. Where were you born and raised?
Sure. I was born in Peoria, Illinois, right downstate, halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. Raised in a small town called Metamora, a town of about 2,000 people. So I'm a native Midwesterner. Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, those parts of the country are all very, very familiar to me.
What was it about your childhood that lent you to get into jazz and music?
Well, yeah, I think I always knew that I was going to be a musician. My mother always used to like to tell the story that I could sing before I could talk. That before I could talk, she would, rock me to sleep and sing to me, and she was quite amazed that I would start singing back to her. So from as far as back as I can remember, I've always had music in my head. And then I think, at some point in grade school, realizing that other kids didn't have that too, realized that, oh, well, that's kind of strange. And then started taking guitar lessons. And certainly throughout, junior high and early high school, people would say to me, kids would say, oh, well, you're going to be a rock star someday. And I just sort of chuckle and go along with it. But somewhere deep inside, I knew that wasn't quite right. It didn't feel quite right. And I remember in high school playing in my high school jazz band, and we went to one of these jazz festivals and heard the host college band, and they had two people playing with them, and it was Phil Wilson on trombone and Rufus Reed on bass. And for some reason, Rufus particularly really struck me, and it was the first time I remember sitting in the front row and watching him and listening and thinking, okay, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. Now I know what it looks like, I know what it sounds like, and I started, Count Basie records, Charlie Parker, whatever I could get my hands on, and away I went.
So was it a foregone conclusion that music was going to be in your future, or did you have any other dreams?
Well, I had the sort of typical boyhood dreams of, I wanted to be a baseball player. But I think around the age of 15 or so, I discovered the curveball, or I should say the curveball passed me by. And so I realized that my days as a baseball player were probably numbered. And at the same time, I was really starting to come into my own as a player and really start to listen to a lot of music and practice and have that desire. In fact, I remember it was really funny. About the age of 14, it was like a switch went off, and my parents went from, having to sort of hold a gun to my head to get me to practice to then all of a sudden they couldn't get me out of my bedroom because all I wanted to do was listen to records and play. So I think that's kind of, baseball player was really it. But otherwise, I just sort of got my way through school, wasn't really interested. But then all of a sudden when I went to college, I was like, oh, well, yeah, this is where I want to be. And then I was a straight A student from then on because I was studying stuff that I really cared about.
In your life as being a stage performer, did you ever get nervous, or has it just been a natural fit for you to perform live?
Oh, I think you always get, I don't know if it's nervous, but you certainly get that heightened adrenaline, just before you go on stage. I don't think you ever get over that. But I think what I learned from a pretty young age was that on top of being a little scary, it was exciting. And I think certainly if you're destined to be a musician, your skill from a young age takes over too, and you learn that it's a pretty good experience. It's fun, and you get a big rush of adrenaline from the response from other people, and it's generally a really good deal. And even the occasional experience that's not so great, you're able to just kind of slough off and know that the next one's probably going to be really good again. And I think that's what did it for me. It was just like, wow, this is fun. This is where I want to be. This is the most enjoyable thing that I do on a day-to-day basis. And that's still true to this day.
And that's taken you across, North America and the globe. You've been with Prairie, Debbie Gibson, Debbie Reynolds. There's been so many people. What have you learned in your travels and playing with different folks over the years? What's been the greatest thing about doing that?
Well, I think the thing that I've learned that I really hold dear to my heart, also, by the way, I was Gene Pitney's North American touring guitar player until he died in 2006, is to play the song and really, really respect and pay tribute to the song that you're playing. So, like when I'm playing in a band, regardless of what kind of band it is, I always think of myself not as a guitar player, but as a guy who's playing the song, and I just happen to be playing the guitar. And so whether I'm, accompanying some pop singer or if I'm playing in a jazz group, no matter what I'm doing, the song is never far from my consciousness, to the point where, in getting to study with some pretty heavy people in the last couple of decades, learning that one of the things that I've really learned to do is to sort of, when I'm soloing, I'm thinking of a counterpoint between my solo and the melody of the tune. The chord changes are fine, but I'm actually really more interested in the melody of the tune. So what I'm really thinking of my solo as being like a secondary thing that goes along with the melody. Even though it might sound like it has absolutely nothing to do with the melody, in my head, I'm still humming the melody to myself the whole time that I'm soloing. So that's probably my answer to that question is melody is key, the song is absolutely king, and everything else just sort of falls into place from there.
So how much fun is it to be in an orchestra pit for a Broadway musical?
It's a lot of fun. And for a guy like me that, you asked me about being on stage is fun, but I don't really get off that much on the spotlight in the attention. So playing in a Broadway show and being in the orchestra pit is perfect for me because I get to do it, and I get to be playing in front of a couple of thousand people every night. And it's on a really high level, and all the other players are really great, and of course the singers are phenomenal. But I'm in the dark and nobody can see me. And the only way that you would know that I was there if you read the program and saw my name. So, I kind of like that little bit of anonymity, but at the same time, I'm in showbiz, and I'm doing it, and it's great, and it's a lot of fun, and I get to meet a lot of really great, interesting people who are fun to hang around with. It's just, I remember a guitar player years ago telling me that, man, they let me play. They let me have the guitar in my lap and play for 3 hours a night. How great is that? And I've just always kind of held that with me, no matter what the gig is, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. Like, hey, I'm getting paid to play the guitar in front of a lot of people, and it's, What could be better than that?
Absolutely. And speaking of fun gigs, Prairie Home Companion, how many times have you been on that show?
Let's see. I think the last one was a long time ago. Of course, the show has kind of changed over now. I think the last time I did it was about 2001 or 2, and I subbed on it a handful of times. Pat Donahue had been a long-time guitarist in that band, in the Guys All-Star Shoe Band, and once in a while, once or twice a year, you know, he was quite a performer, is quite a performer in his own right, so he would go out and do festivals. He would try to, you know, have them not conflict with the show, but once in a while they would. And so they would call me in to sub for him. And that was, again, one of those situations that's just a lot of fun because, you know that the show is going out to millions of listeners. You're playing with a band of guys that's just, they're just top-notch players. You're getting to back artists and talent that comes through the show. You never know who's going to be there. My favorite memory of that show was one weekend getting to travel to Atlanta, and one of the musical guests that weekend was Buddy Emmons, the legendary steel guitar player from Nashville.
Yeah.
And wow, that was amazing getting to play with him. He was just such an incredible musician and a super, super nice guy. And that's one of those experiences I'll never forget, you know, getting to play and hang out with Buddy Emmons. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool, man. You know, the one thing that's been very evident about your career is that it's always, no matter what, it's always been pretty jam-packed. When you look back on your career, are you happy at what you've done?
Well, that's a great question, Joe. I think as most musicians, you know, we would answer it with some sort of disclaimer. For me, I think what I'm doing now with the album Good Hope represents, you know, I've learned to be a really good sideman. I've learned to be a guitar player for hire and to do whatever it takes with whomever, however, whyever. But I've rarely allowed myself to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to call the shots. I'm going to pick the tunes. I'm going to put a band together. I'm going to do my own thing. And as I said, I haven't done a record in 20 years. So this is an opportunity for myself to do that and have that kind of fun playing, which I just don't get the opportunity to do very often. So I'm really appreciative of this and really looking forward to see where this goes.
You know, the other part of you is as an educator. You're a lecturer for jazz guitar and improvisation. What is your approach to students?
The first thing is always, and I always tell students, like the first lesson or two may not seem like it amounts to much because it's basically me getting to know you and finding out where you're at. Because that's, I think, the first thing that I learned when I was a student was, you know, the teacher has to know where I'm at, what I'm capable of, and what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are, so that then we can attack those weaknesses and come up with some approaches to work on them and improve in those areas. So that's the first thing that I do with the students. I just have them play, or I play with them, and just, you know, certainly find out what their likes are, because that can help. But primarily just find out where they are as a player and as a musician, where they want to go from there, and then just listen and observe and figure out ways that I can help them get to where they want to be. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. I used to try that years ago and realized that, boy, that just does not work. You really got to approach the student as just an individual. And certainly, you know, I have ideas that I generally use with all or most of my students, but how I approach them, what order I do things, you know, that kind of thing, it really varies from person to person.
You know, the one thing, too, that's very interesting about your history is you've been able to share the stage with what people would consider dream gigs they could view firsthand, like George Shearing, Bob Brookmeyer, Tal Farlow, Buddy DeFranco. So what I want to do is ask you this. If you could go back in time and witness a stellar jazz show, get into that DeLorean and go, where would you go? Who would you want to see?
Oh, wow. I think a couple of things. The first one that comes to mind is I'd love to have seen some of those gigs that Pat Metheny did with Jaco Pastorius back in like the mid-'70s, before they recorded Bright Size Life. You know, when Pat was just like 2 years old or whatever, and he just quit Berkeley, and apparently they just kind of went up and down the Eastern Seaboard in a van. I can't remember who was playing drums with them, and they just played bars. I would have loved to have seen one of those. That would have been really something. I got to know Bob Brookmeyer later in his life, and we became friends, and he was a really fabulous guy and was very helpful to me. He was going to help me, kind of with meeting people and whatnot when I moved to New York City, which I didn't do, as I said. I would have loved to have seen Bob play when he was a younger man. I would have loved to have seen him in his prime, like in the 50s. Because even in the 2000s when I knew him, and he was having health problems, he was still an amazing musician, an amazing player. I would have loved to have, been a fly on a wall at a club in New York in like 1953 and heard him play.
George Shearing had to be quite an experience to play with.
George was one. I was just thinking of this the other day, and I can't remember why, but I think a musician friend and I were talking about humor and comedy. And George Shearing gig, I think I only did like maybe 1 or 2 weekends with him with, I can't remember which symphony orchestra it was, maybe Indianapolis. But it was a delight because I got to do that Shearing sound, the guitar and vibes and piano. So I got to play some of that with him. And I believe Brian Torf, his longtime bass player, was on the gig. So I got to sit and listen to them. George was telling just a constant stream of jokes between tunes, and he was hilarious. So it was a dream gig. I mean, I got to play with him. I got to hear him. He was a fabulous musician. He was funny as all get out, and get paid too, and get to hang out. So it was just a dream gig. I'll never forget that weekend. It was so much fun.
So no matter what you've done in your career, it's evident that you love jazz. So let me ask you just point blank, why do you love jazz?
Well, I think I love the freedom. And it's really interesting because, like, on the other side of that, for me, I've never been much of a classical musician. I just kind of admit that up front. But like that, playing a Broadway show or something like that, that's my classical music, because then that's where I have a part and I have to play it, and I have to play it a certain way, and I have to play it that way every night, 8 shows a week. And that's fun, but it's only fun when I do it on the side, for for money. But for real expression, I want to be able to take a tune and a structure, as I said earlier, a melody, and see what I can do with it, see where it takes me on that given day, that performance. And I found in my lifetime that only jazz really allows me to do that.
So is there a metaphor as a runner that you can draw a parallel between jazz and running?
Oh, wow. Well, unfortunately, I'm an injured runner these days, so I'm not really doing a lot of running. I'm not sure. Other than you'd kind of, every run is different, every race is different, and you just have to kind of start and see where it takes you. And that's certainly like playing jazz, playing a tune, playing with players. Even if you're playing the same players every night is different, and every solo is going to be different. And certainly every run is different. The weather's different. How you feel is different. How well you slept the night before. And then it's just, I think, the attitude of, okay, well, whatever it is, I'm going to make the most out of it, and I'm going to go with it. And I'm not going to, just sort of bemoan the fact that, well, I didn't run as well as I did yesterday or anything like that. Just, it is what it is. It's a day. You go out, you get your run in, you get your miles in, and take it for what it is. And good, bad, or otherwise, tomorrow will be another day, and you get to do the run again. Tomorrow's another gig. You get to play the gig. You get to play the tunes again and approach them in a different way. So maybe that's the parallel, that it's just, you're just kind of living in the moment, seeing what happens, and making the best of it.
So do you remember anything that a fan said to you, one of the nicest things that really stands out in your mind about your music?
Oh, gosh. Well, it's really nice when that happens. I remember one time, I think I might have been in college. It was a long time ago. But I remember somebody coming up to me, it was in college, because it was on an original tune, so they didn't know the tune, and somebody came up to me and said, I couldn't tell where the melody ended and your solo began. And that really struck me, because it told me that my soloing was just as melodic as I wanted it to be and hoped that it was being, because that's definitely something that I strive for, is that I want my playing to be really, really melodic and sound like it tells a story and sounds like it, you could write it down and then make a tune out of it. That's how I want my soloing to be. And for somebody to come up to me after a performance and pick that out, that specifically, was really quite striking. And that was a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it.
So everything's going to come down to this. Your family has a perception of who you are, your friends, your fans, business associates. But when you personally wake up, face the world, and go do what you do, living your life, who do you think you are?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, yeah, I like most people. I'm a lot of things. I'm a husband and a father and a brother and a friend and a neighbor, and I'm a musician and I'm a teacher, and I'm all of those things. And I think, like any of us, regardless of who we are and what we do, we just try to integrate those parts of ourselves as best we can. Now, as a musician, which, is an art form, so as an artist, I think the struggle in what we really strive to do is to integrate those things and then let them influence our art. So that's certainly something when I wake up in the morning and I know I'm going to perform that day, I know I'm going to play that day, is I'm just really interested to see how my day is going to go and then how that's going to affect the performance that I give that night. And because I never know, and sometimes if I think I know, like, oh, I had a really bad day today, oh, it's going to be an awful gig tonight, I'm surprised. Sometimes those days, the gig is actually the best. I remember talking about Bob Brookmeyer, and I mentioned ever so briefly my divorce some years ago. I remember going through that and remembering things that Bob told me about the low points in his life where he said, the bandstand was my refuge. There were times in my life where nothing made sense except music, and I certainly have lived through those times too, where some of the hardest times in my life personally have been the most gratifying musically, because it's the one place in my life when I get up on that stage or when I get in that orchestra pit at night, I know what to do. I'm a very competent person. I know how to do this. I know how to make it sound really good. I know how to blend in really well with the people around me. It's incredibly satisfying to do that. And so when I'm in that, all of my troubles and everything that might be going on in my life totally disappear. So music has been, something that's saved me probably more than once, and also something that's really made me look at how I sort of am in the world, and really concentrating on not just taking, but also, giving back and making sure that as I'm playing, I'm really thinking of it as an act of not just getting a gift, but giving a gift and spreading it to other people and thinking about that sort of thing. So hopefully that's who I am, and that's kind of how I am in the world.
That's a profound way to wrap everything up. I like that answer very much. Very much.
Thanks, Joe.
It's a high note. David, thank you for opening up, giving me a little bit of your world and my audience, and thank you for the music. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's good to talk to you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, Minnesota, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to David for his tasty music and all of those stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Go to neonjazz at youtube.com. And for all things Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.